Dad, there's a $225,000 loan in my name.
Say that again, slow. Come stand where I can hear you.
My college aid got denied. There's a defaulted loan under my name and my social security number. $225,000, and I never took a dime of it.
You're 19. You've never borrowed a dollar in your life.
I know, but every piece of it has my name on it.
Across the yard, through the glass office window, Saul saw his partner, Kurt Delaney, lift a banker's box off the desk and carry it out toward his truck. Kurt saw them looking, and he raised a hand and smiled, easy as a Sunday.
Give me the letter, Nia. Keystone Lending Group.
I've never heard of them. I called. They said I signed for it 8 months ago. They said it was notarized.
You were in Ohio 8 months ago. At the trade camp, I drove you myself.
That's what I told them. They didn't care. They just kept saying my name was on it.
Saul watched the taillights swing out onto the road, and then he set the letter down on the welding table.
Okay. Nobody yells. Nobody panics. Go inside, make us both coffee, and don't say a word about this to Kurt when he gets back.
Why not Kurt? Kurt does all the money stuff. He'd know how to fix it. Saul looked at the office, at the empty desk, at the space where a banker's box had been an hour ago and was not now. That's exactly why, he said. Coffee. Go on. Here's what you would need to know to understand why a welder went that quiet instead of that loud. Solomon Barnes was 45 years old, and he had built structural steel for 25 of those years. And the one thing a structural welder learns before anything else is that you cannot trust what a thing looks like. A weld can be bright and smooth and beautiful on the surface and be hollow all the way through, full of gas pockets and cold laps and lack of fusion. And it will hold up a handshake and a photograph and then let a bridge down into a river the first hard winter. You cannot see it with your eyes. You have to shoot it with film, put it under the light, and look at what is underneath. Saul had spent his whole life learning not to believe the shine. He had just forgotten to apply it to a man. He owned the shop with Kurt Delaney, and they had been partners for 15 years. Barnes and Delaney Fabrication, out on the Industrial Road in Ferris, Michigan. Saul ran the floor. He was the welder, the one whose stamp went on the steel. A little punched mark he drove into every joint he finished, his own initials in the metal, because a certified welder signs his work in a way that can never be lifted off and stands behind it and goes to prison if it fails, and he lied about it. Kurt ran the office. Kurt was the numbers man, the talker, the one who wore a collared shirt to the bank and shook hands with the county and made the boring, frightening parts of a business feel handled. For 15 years, the arrangement had felt like a good weld. You brought two different metals together, and if you did it right, the joint was stronger than either one alone. Saul had lost his wife, Renee, to a fast and ugly cancer when Nia was 7, and after that it had been the two of them, a welder and a girl, in a small house with a garden Renee had planted that Saul kept alive because he did not know how to let it die. He raised Nia in the shop as much as at home. She had done her homework in the office. She had learned to run the invoices and the timesheets by the time she was 15, because she was quick with numbers in a way her father was not, and because helping felt like belonging. That was the detail that would keep Saul up at night later. His daughter had sat at that office desk, trusting, and somewhere in a drawer or a file or a form, her whole clean, untouched identity had been sitting there too. A 19-year-old's blank credit and pristine social security number, the most valuable thing in the building, and the man who sat across from her every day had known exactly what it was worth. 9 months earlier, the shop had won the biggest job of its life. The county was rehabilitating the Ferris River Bridge, and the general contractor, Halloran Construction, had awarded Barnes and Delaney the structural steel package, $2 million. It was the kind of contract that changes a small shop's whole future, and it had come to them, in part, because it carried a minority-owned business participation requirement, and Barnes and Delaney qualified because Saul owned the controlling share. Kurt had brought the paperwork to Saul in the yard and clapped him on the shoulder and said they had finally made it. And Saul had believed him, and for a few months it had even seemed true. Kurt had explained back then that a job that size needed a line of credit. You buy the steel up front, you make payroll for months, and the county pays you in progress draws, slow, one certified pay application at a time. So you borrow against the contract to float the gap. It was normal. Every contractor did it. Saul did not understand the machinery of it and did not pretend to, and Kurt had said the words a trusting man wants to hear. Said, don't worry about the money side, You keep the steel sound, and I'll keep the paper sound. You weld, and I'll handle the rest. And Saul had gone back to the floor and welded, and slept fine because his father had raised him to believe that a partnership was a joint, and a joint you tested once and then trusted. He had not tested it. That was the shameful part, the part he would have to say out loud before this was over. He had let a man handle the money side of a $2 million contract for the better part of a year without once looking hard at it. Nia took it harder than he did, and that was the part that cut him. She had run the shop's invoices since she was 15, and somewhere in her she had decided that meant she had left a door open. He found her at 2 in the morning at the kitchen table with her laptop and a legal pad, trying to teach herself what a lien was, her jaw set exactly the way her mother's used to set. He told her it was not her fault. She said she should have caught it. He told her that a person who trusts the people they love is not the one who did wrong when that trust gets used, that the blame belonged to the hand that turned the key, not to the girl who left it on the hook. She nodded and did not believe him, not yet, and kept reading. And Saul understood that she was going to have to win this as much as he was, because a stolen name is not only money. It is the sense that being good counts for something, and someone had taken that from his daughter along with her credit. He put it under the light that night. After Nia went to bed, Saul sat at the kitchen table with a box of the shop records he kept at home, the ones he kept because a welder keeps everything, weld maps and mill certificates and inspection reports, and because he did not fully trust his own memory for paperwork, his own copies of the contract and the pay schedule. He was not a numbers man, but he did the thing he did know how to do, which was to lay two things side by side and look for the place where they did not match, the way you compare a weld to the print. On one side, the county's pay schedule, the draws Halloran had certified and released against the bridge job. On the other, what he could see of the shop's actual bank position, the payroll that kept bouncing tight, the steel supplier who had started calling. The two did not match. The county had released real money, draw after draw, hundreds of thousands of dollars, certified paid on the bridge, and almost none of it had landed where it should have landed, in the shop, on the steel, in the payroll. It had come in, and it had gone somewhere else, all but a thin margin Kurt had left behind, just enough to keep the steel coming and the crew paid so that no one on the floor ever thought to ask a question. Saul was not an accountant, but he did not need to be. He had spent his life following a bead to find where the metal went wrong, and this was the same skill exactly. He followed the money the way he followed a seam, and every place he followed it, it ran away from the shop and toward a set of accounts he did not recognize. It was slow work, and he was bad at it, and he did it anyway, the way he had learned to do the parts of the trade he was bad at by going slower than a smart man would and refusing to quit. He printed the bank statements and laid them across the kitchen floor in rows, draw by draw, and he took a red marker and circled every place the money left. By 3 in the morning, his kitchen floor looked like a weld map, a diagram of a joint, except the flaw he was tracing was not in steel. Every red circle pointed the same direction, away from the shop, away from the steel, away from the men on the floor who were owed a paycheck, toward the same handful of account numbers over and over, as regular as a machine. He did not know the legal word for what he was looking at. He knew the shape of it. He had been finding that exact shape in bad welds his whole life, the place where two things were supposed to be joined and were not, and only looked solid from the top. And underneath all of it, the foundation the whole thing was built on was a loan, a $225,000 line of credit from Keystone Lending Group taken out 8 months ago, written as a business loan against the bridge contract's receivables, signed and notarized. The shop was the borrower, but the loan carried a personal guarantor, a name pledged behind the whole thing so that if it went bad, the debt would land on a person and not just a company. The guarantor was Nia Barnes. Saul sat with that for a long time. He did not put his fist through the wall, though the wall was right there, and his fists had driven welding stamps into hardened steel for 25 years. He sat still because Nia was asleep down the hall, and because a man who wants to win does not swing at the first thing that makes him angry. He had learned that on the floor, too. When the arc flares wrong, you do not jerk. You hold. You finish the bead. You find out what happened after. What had happened was not complicated, once he could see it. His partner had needed a clean name because the shop's own credit was already bled dry, and the only clean name in the building belonged to a 19-year-old girl who had trusted him with her paperwork. Her social security number sat in the shop's own employee file because she was on the payroll, and her ID had been photocopied for that file, and he had watched her sign her name 100 times. Keystone, which made its money by not asking questions, had waved the guarantor through without ever laying eyes on her. Kurt had pledged $225,000 against Saul's daughter, and he had been draining the bridge money out the back for months, and when the last big draw came in and cleared, Kurt was going to be gone, and the loan was going to come due, and the name on the loan, the person the collectors and the fraud investigators and the whole weight of it would land on, was going to be Nia. First, he did the obvious thing, the thing any father would do, and it taught him what he was up against. He drove Nia to Keystone's branch office and then to their own bank, and at both places they said the same thing in the same patient voice. The name on the loan was Nia Barnes. The social security number matched. It was signed and notarized. If she believed she was a victim of fraud, she was welcome to file a police report and a written dispute and wait. And in the meantime, the account remained her responsibility, and the collection calls would continue. Nobody was cruel about it. That was the worst part. They were just processing a form, and the form said Nia, and to form a name is the whole of a person. Saul left understanding that he could not win this by being upset in a lobby. A name on a document outranks a living girl standing in front of you, right up until you can prove the name was stolen, and proving it was going to take something more solid than a father's word. He needed someone who spoke the language he did not speak. He did not have money for lawyers. What he had was a receipt because Nia had shown him the letter, and the letter said the loan had been notarized, and a notarization is a physical event. Somebody had sat at a notary's table and signed and pressed a thumb into a book. Nia had been in another state that week. So somebody had sat at that table pretending to be his daughter. And notaries, Saul learned when he started calling around, are required by Michigan law to keep a journal, a bound book, and in that book, for a loan of that size, they take a thumbprint. The notarization stamp on the Keystone loan traced to a man named Wendell Pope, who ran the notary and shipping counter at a pack and ship store in a strip mall on the far side of Ferris. Wendell Pope was 55, and he had sat behind that counter for 19 years, notarizing the paperwork of people's whole lives, powers of attorney and car titles and loan documents. And in all that time, almost no one had ever come back to ask him what he had seen, because no one thinks the man at the shipping counter has seen anything. Wendell Pope had seen everything. He kept his journals in order, all 19 years of them, because keeping them in order was the one part of the job that was entirely his. And he was proud of it in the quiet way a person is proud of a thing nobody else notices. Saul brought Nia with him, and he brought the letter, and he asked Wendell Pope a simple question. He asked whether Mr. Pope had notarized a loan for Nia Barnes 8 months ago, and he set Nia there in front of the counter, 19 and real and breathing, so the man could look at her. Nia had not wanted to come. On the drive over, she said in a small voice, what if it turned out she had signed something after all? What if she had clicked yes on some form without reading it, and this was all somehow her fault? Saul told her that was not how it worked, and that they were going to find out the truth either way, because the truth was the only ground he knew how to stand on. Now she stood at the counter with her chin up, doing the brave thing, which was to let a stranger compare her real living face to a name on a page and say out loud whether the two of them matched. Wendell Pope pulled the journal for that month. He ran a finger down the page, and he found the line, and then he went very still, in the way. A careful person goes still when their careful record has just told them something is wrong. He looked at the entry. He looked at Nia. He looked at the entry again. This says I notarized a signature for Nia Barnes, he said slowly. There's a thumbprint here, right in the book, next to the name. That's my practice on anything over 100,000. I take the print. He turned the book around on the counter so they could see it. Young lady, is that your thumbprint? I've never been in this store in my life, Nia said. I've never met you. No, Wendell Pope said quietly. You haven't. I'd have remembered. I remember the man who brought the paperwork because he did all the talking and he was in a hurry, and people in a hurry stick with you. He brought a young woman to sign. I'm telling you now, looking at you, she was not the girl in front of me. He tapped the page, careful, a man who only says what he can back up. I can't tell you whose thumbprint this is. That's not my job, and I won't guess, but I can tell you it's here, in the book, and that whoever pressed it, it wasn't this young lady, because this young lady has never stood at my counter. Somebody can compare it. That's what the print is for. There it was, sitting in a bound book on a shipping counter that the whole world walked past. A thumbprint next to Nia's name, pressed by a hand that had come in pretending to be her. Kurt had needed the loan to look real, so he had done it the real way, an actual notary and an actual journal, because a fake notarization would have fallen apart. In his need to make the fraud airtight, he had pressed it into a record that could hang him. A thumbprint does not argue. It does not have a motive. It is just the truth of a hand, waiting for someone to hold it up against the right one. Detective Ruiz took it from there, the way the process is supposed to go. She had Nia's own thumbprints taken under oath, and she sent the print from Wendell's journal to a state examiner for comparison, and the answer that came back weeks later was flat and final. They did not match, not on a single ridge. And Nia did her own part while they waited, because it had stopped being only her father's fight the day it became her name. She dug up everything that proved where she really was the week the loan was signed, the trade camp sign-in sheet with her name in her own hand, time-stamped photos off her phone, a receipt from a diner 200 miles into Ohio, and she built a folder as careful as any her father kept. If someone has ever handed you their trust with both hands, the way you hand a torch to an apprentice and you have watched them use it to burn the one person you would die for, then stay with this. Because what saved Solomon Barnes was not a lawyer or a lucky break. It was a thumbprint in a book nobody thought to open, and a girl brave enough to say out loud that a name was not the same as a person. Saul did the arithmetic a poor man does before a fight, and it was bad. Kurt would say Nia signed it. Kurt would say Saul was a bitter partner who did not understand the finances and was making wild accusations. The bank believed Kurt. The county heard Kurt in the meetings. Saul was the welder in the back who was good with his hands and not with his words. But Wendell Pope had said one more thing before they left, and it was the thing that turned a private ruin into something with a much bigger shape. Shoah, you're not the first, Wendell had said. I don't want to overstep, but that man, the one in a hurry, he's been in here before with paperwork like this. Different names, different young people. Small contractors, most of them. I notarize what's put in front of me if the ID checks, that's my job, and the IDs he brought checked, or looked like they did. But I've wondered about him more than once. You're just the first one who ever came back and asked. Different names, different young people, small contractors. Saul drove home with that sitting in his chest like a cold weld, because it meant Kurt Delaney was not a desperate man who had made one terrible mistake. It meant this was a thing Kurt did. And the more Saul pulled the thread, with the help of a woman he finally found who would listen. A state financial crimes investigator named Detective Ruiz, who had a stack of files as tall as anyone's and a particular quiet hatred for people who stole from the working poor, the more the shape came clear. Kurt was not even the top of it. Behind Kurt was Keystone Lending Group, and behind Keystone was a broker named Vincent Toller, and Vincent Toller had a business model. He found small contractors, often minority-owned firms that had just won their first big public contract, the ones with a valuable set-aside qualification and an owner who was better with his trade than with paper. He got a man like Kurt on the inside, or turned one who was already drowning. He loaded fraudulent debt onto the business or the owner's family, drained the contract, and when it collapsed, he was positioned to swallow the qualification and the contract whole through a shell that met the requirement on paper. It was a machine for turning a working man's biggest break into the instrument of his ruin, and it had done it before, in 3 counties that Detective Ruiz could find, and probably more that she could not. She took Saul to meet one of them, because she said he needed to understand what he was up against, and because the man had asked to meet whoever was finally fighting back. He was a mason named Earl, 60 years old, who had laid brick and block his whole life and won one good municipal contract and let a smooth partner handle the paper. The debt Toller's machine had loaded onto him had been put in his late wife's name, and it had drained his contract and taken his shop. And by the time anyone believed him, the trail was cold, and the shell company that had swallowed his qualification was 3 names deep and untouchable. He had lost all of it. He shook Saul's hand with a grip like a vice and told him one thing, quietly, that Saul carried into the closeout meeting like a tool on his belt. "Don't wait for them to believe you," Earl said. "They didn't believe me until there was nothing left to save. You've still got something to save. Go get it while it's still there to get." Kurt's own why, when it finally came out, was smaller and sadder than what he had done. He had a gambling debt that had eaten him alive over 3 years, a hole he had filled with the shop's credit until the shop's credit was gone, and then Toller had offered him a way to fill it that only cost him a girl's name and his own soul. And he had told himself the thing that men like him always tell themselves, that he would put it all back before anyone got hurt. But he had been putting it back for 8 months by taking more, and there was no version where anyone did not get hurt, and the person he had chosen to hurt was the daughter of the man who had trusted him for 15 years because she was the cleanest, easiest name in the building. Saul was not without pity for him. He had loved Kurt like a brother once, but pity is not the same as surrender, and this was his daughter's name. The trap was not complicated, which is the only kind of trap that survives contact with a room full of people who have already decided who you are. Detective Ruiz needed Kurt to reach for the money one more time, in the open, in front of witnesses so that the reaching itself was a crime she could put her hands on. And Kurt was about to. The bridge job was almost done. Saul had kept welding it, sound and stamped, all through this, because the steel did not care about his heartbreak. And a bridge is a bridge, and the final structural work was passing inspection. Halloran Construction had scheduled the project closeout meeting, the one where the final payment would be reviewed and released, $610,000 for the last of the completed work, plus $85,000 in retainage the county had held back all year, nearly $700,000 in one wire. Kurt had already quietly arranged for that final payment to route to an account he controlled. It was the last big draw. After it cleared, he was gone. Wendell Pope did not have to come. He was a notary at a shipping counter, not a witness in anyone's war, and no one would have blamed a careful man for staying out of it. Saul asked him anyway, plainly, because he did not know how to ask any other way. Wendell closed his store an hour early on the day of the meeting, put the right journal in a canvas bag, and drove himself across town in a car older than Nia. He said only that he had notarized that page, that his stamp and his name were on it, and that a man who keeps a book for 19 years does not get to keep it only on the easy days. So Saul let it come. He kept working. He said nothing to Kurt, and this was the hardest welding he had ever done, holding a steady bead across weeks while the man who had robbed his child stood in the same office asking about lunch. One afternoon, Kurt leaned in the office doorway with 2 sandwiches and asked if Saul wanted to split a sub, and stayed to talk about the Lions and the weather and a fishing trip they had always meant to take. Saul sat there with the theft of his daughter's name sitting in his chest, and he made himself laugh at the right places because Detective Ruiz had told him the trap only worked if Kurt stayed comfortable, and a comfortable man does not move his money early. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the funeral, to eat a sandwich across from that man and say maybe we'll get out on the water this summer. His hands did not shake. He had spent 25 years holding an arc dead steady inside a mask where no one could see his face, and now he learned the last of it, that the steadiest hand of all is the one that already knows exactly where the flaw is and is only waiting for the light. Kurt, for his part, felt safe because Kurt believed the same thing everyone believed, which was that Saul was a good welder and a simple man who did not understand the money and would never in his life read his way to the bottom of a structured fraud. Kurt's whole safety rested on the underestimation of Solomon Barnes. It was the same bet Toller had made, and Keystone and the bank and the county. Everyone had looked at the man with the burns up his forearms and filed him under the word less. That was the flaw running through the whole thing, and Saul had spent his life finding exactly that kind of flaw. The danger was real, and Detective Ruiz made him sit with it before he agreed. Kurt was not a cartoon. He was a cornered man who had already shown he would sacrifice a teenager to save himself, and cornered men do not go quietly. And the closeout meeting was not friendly ground. It would be Halloran's people and the county's. Men in good shirts who had dealt with Kurt for months and had never learned Saul's name. And the easiest thing in the world for them to do was to hear a dispute between partners as noise, release the money to keep the project moving, and let it get sorted out later in a lawsuit a welder could not afford. If the final draw cleared into Kurt's account before Saul could stop it, it would be gone, wired 3 times and offshore by morning, and Nia would be left holding a $225,000 loan in a fraud on her record, and Saul would be left holding nothing at all. Kurt was not sitting still either, and Saul felt the first real fear the morning he tried to log into the shop's bank portal and found himself locked out, his access quietly revoked. Everything now running through Kurt alone. That same week, the Halloran project manager called Saul, friendly but careful, to say that Kurt had given them a heads up that his partner was going through some personal trouble and might make some emotional accusations at closeout, and that they hoped the 2 of them could keep it professional. Kurt had gotten to the room before Saul could. He had spent 15 years being the man a room already trusted, and he was spending that trust now, fast, to paint Saul as the unstable one before Saul ever opened his mouth. Detective Ruiz heard all of it and did not flinch. "Good," she said. "Let him. A man who works that hard to discredit you in advance is a man who already knows exactly what you're holding." He almost lost his nerve once, 2 nights before the meeting. Kurt came to the house. It was the first time he had stood in Saul's kitchen in months, and for a second, seeing him in the doorway, Saul saw the friend who had helped him carry Renee's casket. Kurt did not raise his voice. He said he knew Saul had been asking questions. He said the money side of a job like this was messy and complicated, and that things always looked wrong to somebody who did not understand them, and that if Saul went into that closeout meeting throwing accusations he did not understand, He would blow up the contract, lose the shop for both of them, and drag Nia through a public mess that would follow her for years. He said the smart thing. The thing a good father would do was to let Kurt close out the job clean, take his share, and start fresh. He said it gently. And at the very end, when Saul did not answer, something moved behind Kurt's face, and he said the truest thing he said in the whole business. It was just a name, Saul. It's not like I hurt her. It's a number on a form. I always meant to clear it. You act like I did something to your daughter. I used a piece of paper. And Saul understood then that Kurt genuinely could not see it, that somewhere in 15 years the man had quietly gone hollow inside where no one could see, bright on the surface and empty all the way through, and that this was not a thing you could argue him out of. He walked Kurt to the door. He did not raise his voice, because Nia was in the next room, and because a man learns. You put my daughter's name where mine should have been, Saul said. You knew I'd have signed anything you put in front of me. You could have taken it out of my hide, but you took the one clean thing she had because it was worth more. He opened the door. That's not a piece of paper, Kurt. That's the difference between us. I'll see you at closeout. He did not sleep, and he did not pretend he was sure. He sat at the kitchen table and laid out what he had, the 2 columns of money that did not match, the copies of the draws, and beside them the thing that mattered most, a clean sheet of paper on which Wendell Pope had agreed to write nothing until the day it counted. He had the truth. He was not sure the truth would be louder than Kurt in a room built to hear Kurt. It was Nia who steadied him, in the end, not the other way around. She came out in her socks and sat down across from him the way she used to when she was small and could not sleep, and she looked at the columns of numbers, and because she was quick with numbers the way he never was, she found something in them he had walked past 3 times, a transfer dated the same week as a draw, and she put her finger on it. He's not just taking it, Dad, she said. Look, he moves it the same day, every time, into the same account within an hour. He's careful. He does it the exact same way every single time. She looked up at him. That's not going to look like a mistake to anybody. That's a pattern. That's going to look like exactly what it is. Saul looked at his daughter, 19 years old, finding the pattern in the thing that had been done to her. And he thought about a weld, and about how the same steady hand that makes a sound bead also leaves the same tool marks every time, so that a man's work can be known by its regularity. Kurt's carefulness, the thing that made him good at the office, was the thing that had left the same fingerprint on every theft. He had been careful the same way each time, and that sameness was a signature. You should be a welder, Saul told her, which was the highest thing he knew how to say. I'm still deciding what I should be, Nia said. That's kind of the whole point of the college I can't get into. The closeout meeting was in Halloran Construction's conference room, a long table and a screen and a pot of burnt coffee, the project manager from Halloran and a man from the county, and Kurt in his best collared shirt with the pay application in a neat folder in front of him, ready to be signed and released. Saul came in his work clothes because he had come from the floor, and the room did the thing he knew it would do, which was to look at the 2 of them and assume the man in the good shirt was the one who mattered. Detective Ruiz sat quietly at the back in a jacket that did not announce her, next to a 55-year-old man from a pack-and-ship store holding a bound book on his knees like a hymnal. The project manager worked through the closeout. The final application looked clean. The steel had passed. The county man was ready to certify the last draw. Kurt was smooth and warm and had an answer for everything, and he slid the payment routing form across the table with the account information already filled in, and the project manager reached for his pen, and that was the moment the whole thing could have ended, quietly with a signature, the way it had ended for 3 other contractors in 3 other counties. Saul did not shout. He asked in his flat floor voice for 2 minutes before anyone signed anything, and he said the one sentence that a room full of construction people cannot wave off, which was that there was a discrepancy between the certified draws and the money that had reached the steel, and that he could show it in 90 seconds. And there was enough weight in how he said it, and enough men in that room who had seen a project go bad, that the project manager set down the pen. Saul did not make a speech. He put 2 columns on the screen, the county's certified draws on one side and where the money had actually gone on the other, and he let them sit next to each other the way he would have laid a weld next to its print. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, certified paid on the bridge that had never touched the bridge. He did not accuse anyone. He just showed the room the 2 things that did not match, and pointed, once, at the pattern Nia had found, the same-day transfers into the same account, over and over, careful and identical. Then he read the account number the money had run to, and he read the account number on the routing form. Kurt had just slid across the table for the final draw, and they were the same number. The room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it realizes it was about to sign something. Kurt was good. He came apart at the edges, but he did not fall. He said it was a misunderstanding, legitimate operating transfers, that Saul did not understand cash management. And then he reached into his folder and did the thing Saul had not seen coming. He slid a single sheet across the table, a shop authorization approving that exact account as the project's payment destination, and at the bottom of it was Solomon Barnes's signature. "My partner signed off on every one of these transfers himself," Kurt said, sorrowful now, almost gentle. "He approved the account. I don't know what's gotten into him lately, but I won't sit here and be called a thief for doing what we agreed to in writing." And the room turned. Saul watched it turn, watched the project manager's face close, because a signed authorization is a hard, heavy thing. And now it was a welder's word against a welder's own signature, and everyone at that table already knew which of the two a room believes. The county man reached for his pen. For a few seconds, the whole afternoon slid, and Saul felt himself becoming exactly what Kurt had told them he would be, the unstable partner with a grudge. That was when Nia stood up. She had promised her father she would not speak, and she broke the promise because she was quick the way her mother had been quick, and she had lived inside these documents for 2 weeks, and she knew this one. "That authorization is dated the 14th, she said, and her voice only shook a little. "It came off the shop email account. My father has never sent an email in his life. That account has one password and one person who knows it, and it is not him. And on the 14th, my dad was 40 feet up on the bridge deck welding the north truss in front of the whole crew. He was not at a computer approving anything. Ask any of them." She looked at Kurt, and her voice went steady all the way through. "You signed his name the same way you signed mine." Detective Ruiz stood up then, and behind her, a man from a pack and ship store stood up with a bound book. She gave her name and the case number and said that the loan underpinning this entire contract, a $225,000 line of credit from Keystone, had been taken out in the name of a 19-year-old girl who had never signed it, and that a state examiner had compared the thumbprint recorded at the signing to Nia Barnes's own prints, taken under oath, and that the two did not match on a single ridge. Then Wendell Pope opened his journal to the marked page and said, in his mild, exact voice, that he was the notary of record, that the young woman brought to his counter to sign was not the young woman sitting in this room, and that the man who had brought her, the man in a hurry who did all the talking, was at this table. He looked at Kurt Delaney, not unkindly, the way a careful man looks at a fact he has finally been asked about. There is nowhere in a room to put a thumbprint that does not match, an alibi 40 feet in the air in front of a dozen witnesses, and a signature forged the same way on 2 separate frauds. You can argue about a balance sheet. You cannot argue with all of it at once. Kurt looked at the book, and at the account numbers still glowing on the screen, and at Saul, and whatever had been holding his face together let go. The project manager pulled the routing form back across the table and turned it face down, which is the smallest gesture, and in that room, the loudest. Nobody was releasing that money to anyone that afternoon. And Solomon Barnes, who had every right to stand up and burn the man down in front of the whole room, did the thing that no one expected, which was to say almost nothing at all. He looked at his former partner across the table, and he said only one thing in a voice with no heat left in it. "You used my daughter's name because you thought paper mattered more than people," Saul said. "You were wrong about that." He stood and picked up his folder. "My mark goes on work I'll stand behind. You stole hers because you couldn't stand behind your own. I'm going home to my kid." He walked out into the ordinary daylight of the parking lot, where his truck sat next to Wendell Pope's old sedan, and he stood there a second and breathed. Then he called Nia, who had been waiting by her phone all afternoon, and he said 3 words. It came off. He heard his daughter start to cry on the other end. The good kind, the kind that means a weight has finally come off a person, and he leaned against the truck and let her. The cost came due in the weeks after, because a fraud pulled up into the light does not clean up gently. Detective Ruiz's case, once the thumbprint cracked it open, ran straight up the chain, through Kurt and into Keystone and Vincent Toller, and the whole quiet machine that had been stripping small contractors for years. And the 3 other families she had found stopped being isolated tragedies and became a pattern, which is the thing a prosecutor can finally move on. Kurt was charged not with one crime, but with a scheme of them. And the notary journals, more than one of them now, across more than one victim, were the spine of the case, because a careful man leaves the same careful trace every time, and Kurt had been careful in exactly the same way with every name he stole. He did not go quietly, because men like that never do on the first swing. What sank him, in the end, was the same carefulness that had built him. He had needed everything to look legitimate, so he had used real notaries and real journals. And a real journal keeps a real thumbprint, and you cannot make a stolen thumbprint match a name it was never attached to. The loan came off Nia's name. It took months and a fraud affidavit and Detective Ruiz's report and Wendell Pope's sworn statement. But Keystone's paper fell apart the moment the notarization was shown to be fraudulent, and the $225,000 debt that had been sitting on a 19-year-old like a dropped I-beam was lifted off, line by line, until her credit report said what it had always truly said, which was nothing at all, clean, untouched, hers. Earl the Mason got a phone call too, months later, the kind that comes so late it can only give a man his name back and not his years. But he took it, and he told Saul on the phone that it was the first night he had slept through since his wife's name showed up on a debt she never made. Two of the other contractors began the slow work of clawing back what the machine had taken. Vincent Toller's operation came apart the way these things come apart once one thread is pulled and one careful record is opened, all at once and then all the way down. It did not give anyone back the years. It just meant the machine stopped for these families. On the day a welder refused to sign under pressure and a shipping counter, the notary opened his book. The bridge contract survived too, because the steel was sound and stamped and had never once been part of the lie. And Halloran, once the county untangled the payments, kept Barnes on to finish it, this time with the money running where the certified draws said it ran. What mattered had not happened in that conference room anyway. It had happened at a kitchen table, over 2 columns of numbers, when a girl who was quick the way her mother had been quick put her finger on a pattern and said that's exactly what it is. On a Saturday that spring, Saul took Nia out to the shop, into the good light coming through the big roll-up door. He had a piece of film in his hand, a radiograph, the x-ray of a weld he had shot that week on the last of the bridge steel. He clipped it to the light box on the wall and turned the box on, and the weld lit up from behind, and he showed his daughter how to read it. The dark and the light of it, the places where the metal was solid all the way through and the places on a bad weld, where you would see the little black moons of gas trapped inside, the hollowness the eye can never catch from the surface. "This one's good," he said, running a scarred finger along the film. "See? All the way through. No voids. You could put a truck on that and you'd never know just from the top of it. You have to shoot it and look inside. That's the whole trade, right there." Nia looked at the film for a long time. Her financial aid had come through. The real thing this time, her real clean name on it. And she had decided, she told him, that she was going to do the welding program after all, and then maybe run the business side too. Both because she had learned the hard way that a shop needs somebody who can read the steel in the paper and trust neither one until they've looked inside it. "I want my stamp," she said. "When I'm certified, my own mark." "Sure I am. You'll earn it," Saul said. "And when you drive it into a joint, you'll mean it. That's the only kind of signature that's worth anything. The kind you put on a thing you actually made, that you'd stand behind if it ever fell." He put his hand on the back of her neck the way his own father used to. "Not the kind somebody forges on a form to sell you out. That kind's just ink. Ours goes all the way through." Nia was quiet, looking at the weld glowing on the light box. She said her mother would have liked that she was going to run the numbers and the steel both, because her mother had been the quick one with figures and Saul had been the one with the hands, and it had taken losing a name and getting it back to put the two halves in one person. Saul did not trust his voice for a moment. Out past the roll-up door, Renee's garden was coming up green again the way it did every spring, because he had never once let it die. Then Nia reached up and clipped the next radiograph onto the box herself, and switched on the light the way he had shown her and studied it, the dark and the bright of it. "You can't tell anything from the surface," she said. "No," Saul said. "That's why you look underneath. If this one held something for you, send it to the person in your life who is solid all the way down. The one who does the quiet work and stands behind it, and tell them you see it."